Today on Remington's Inside the Industry, my guest is Jeff Crane, the President and CEO of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Since 1989, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation has maintained a singleness of purpose that has guided the organization to become the most respected and trusted sportsmen's organization in the political arena. Congressional Sportsmen Foundation's mission is to work with Congress, governors, and state legislators to protect and advance hunting, angling, recreational shooting, and trapping. This podcast is brought to you by Remington Firearms. For more information on the new era of Remington, visit our site at remarms.com. Today I've got Jeff Crane, President and CEO of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Jeff, thanks very much for joining me.
Ken, delighted. Good morning to you.
And look, I think we've got a fair amount to talk about. You probably don't know, but I was the CEO of Crosman Corporation and was one of the first kind of firearms airgun companies that joined the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, I think in 2001, maybe a little bit later, 2002, 2003, 2004, something like that.
I actually do remember that because I joined CSF in 2002, and 100% you were the first one. And going way back, thank you for supporting it and seeing the opportunity and supporting the mission. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, you didn't have to say way back. Way back kind of puts a lot of years on us, you know.
Yeah,
so,
fair enough.
Thanks for just being one of the first.
Okay, fair enough.
But I enjoyed having going to the shoots, et cetera, and it was I thought at the time the reason that I did join is I thought it was really something that firearms companies and companies within the firearms industry really should be involved with. Tell me a little bit how it's changed in the last 20 years, which I guess is about the time that I originally joined.
So I would say the biggest change, Ken, was back in originally we were set up to support and focus on the United States Congress and really kind of federal policy in Washington, D.C. And starting about the time that I joined the foundation in 2002, and recognizing that a lot of the wildlife management decisions that really affect hunters and anglers are made at the state level, a big strategic effort was made to try to take the model from Washington and take it to the states and build out legislative sportsmen's caucuses in all 50 of the state legislatures, which in this 20-year period we have successfully done. And I think that has just made a dramatic difference from just expanding our effectiveness and our reach beyond just the federal, now across all the states. And I know it's the proof is there because just in the last 5 years alone, we have over 1,000 legislative victories for sportsmen and women, most of which come from the state level. We do win in Washington too, but things just are glacially slow here in D.C.
Well, look, not understanding much about politics except for kind of understanding the good politics and the bad politics, as it affects me personally, as it affects the firearms industry. I have to believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I have to believe that the state level is really, really important.
100%. First of all, there are 50 state legislatures as opposed to one United States Congress. Secondly, again, a lot of the decisions, Congress is really, they're the federal land managers for all the federal public lands, which is particularly important west of the Mississippi River. But really, their work is on migratory birds and endangered and threatened species. Everything else is really left to the states. And so being entrenched in the states, having these legislative caucuses, which we strive to make them bipartisan, I think that's another key component to this, Ken, is that politics never is static. That pendulum, if you will, swings from left to right, and being able to engage, irrespective of which party is in power. To be having a seat at the table gives us a unique opportunity at the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation that, frankly, a lot of other groups don't have. And again, I think the proof is in the pudding with the stat of 1,000 legislative wins in just the last 5 years alone for sportsmen and women, and most of those come at the state level. So it's been a big undertaking to get there. But I think the dividends are clearly being paid back to not only the individual sportsmen and women, but the industries that rely on them as their customer base. So it's a win on all fronts. And of course we're doing it for the fact that we want to protect and preserve our outdoor traditions for future generations. I spend all my free time when I'm not working, or a lot of it, hunting or fishing, because that's what I love to do. So it's a passion, and most of my staff are the same way. I've got guys hunting here today in different places, and so we practice what we preach.
Well, you think you can go to Canada, and take this whole thing to Canada? I had an interesting conversation with Scott Ellis, who's the CEO of the Guide and Outfitters Association of British Columbia. The other day.
Scott.
And
I know Scott.
We had a great conversation, and being a kind of a fellow Canadian, although I'm a U.S. citizen now, but we had a good conversation. And of course, British Columbia has banned grizzly bear hunting, which is
right.
Absolutely ludicrous, because
Yep.
there's absolutely no shortage of grizzly bears in British Columbia. And, so I guess the question here is, as Scott pointed out, and I think this is generally true that I see a lot of, people talk about the science, but really don't pay much attention to the science. It's more the science of the heart. And gee whiz, those poor this or those poor that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even though, like white-tailed deer, for instance, I think in Texas there's something like 6 million of them. And we still have people saying, oh, those poor white-tailed deer. Well, pretty soon you're overrun with them. So do you find the same thing in the U.S. and the various states? And I'm sure you do, that you try to talk about the science, but people don't really pay attention to the pure science.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people want to use science when it's convenient to support their argument, and then they throw it out when in the science, which is 99% of the time on our side, they want to throw it out and let the emotions and, as you say, social science, and is I guess a word that is giving them too much credit, but they let just their agenda and their emotions drive way too much of it. So, we do have to spend a fair amount of time, whether it be grizzly bears or gray wolves, or, just importations on trophies from overseas, and just in general, you're constantly trying to go after traditional lead ammunition and traditional fishing tackle, and because they've built up this idea that somehow, this is having some catastrophic and detrimental impact to populations, and we keep coming back to the science and saying, show us where the science proves this, and that argument just falls flat because they don't care when it comes to the agenda. And again, that's part of the function that the Sportsmen's Foundation plays. We provide all these legislators, whether they're here in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. Congress, or they're in state houses, with this information. We get them the studies, we boil it down, we show them where the errors are in these attacks, and try to arm them with real facts and information in a concise way that they can use when they're debating these kinds of bills, whether it be here or in Nebraska or Maine or California or wherever it may be, and that's a pivotal role that CSF plays to try to make sure that we have good information, we have that direct access to get it to the decision makers, and that's really the mission and the reason we exist.
Honestly, Jeff, it just seems so freaking bizarre to me that the U.S. government will ban the importation of polar bears, for instance, which a sovereign nation has said, hey, we control our polar bears. We will allow X number of those to be hunted on an annual basis, but the United States says you can't bring those in. Give me a break. You know, Canada is one of the best, I believe, one of the best run nations for their wildlife, probably in the world, for their population, et cetera, et cetera. Yet, who do we think we are to say you can't import these?
Right, 100%. And unfortunately, I've fought that battle for many, many years. Our good friend Congressman Don Young from Alaska, who passed away last spring, was a champion for trying to get certainly the 40 or so people that were adversely affected when they slammed the door on importations of polar bears that they had legally harvested under what was current law that allowed them to hunt them and bring them back in the United States. And when that regulation slammed the door on this, those poor folks just basically got screwed. And we've worked, and honestly, I kind of told the folks, I said, at this point, I don't think you're going to see your bears. And that's been 2008, and I'm pretty confident some of those folks may not be with us anymore, and that's a tragedy. And you're exactly right. They're well managed. There's no reason. It's a neighbor of ours that does a fantastic job with their wildlife management. Sustainable populations, that's kind of emotion-driven stuff that just is we have to deal with it, and the best way we've found to deal with it is to arm the allies that we have in legislatures with the right information and try to get them so that they can speak really coherently and make their arguments, and it wins most of the time. Fortunately, the polar bears is one of those ones where once that got shut, it was really hard because that triggered the Marine Mammals Protection Act, so it wasn't just endangered species. So that just layered the complications on the polar bears. But yeah, that one still bothers me, to be honest with you. So,
well, I mean, maybe what's the thought process of that type of legislation? Because it doesn't just affect those hunters that would go there, but it has a massive effect on the people, the guides, the outfitters, the cooks, the camp attendants, the wranglers, all of those people within those small communities that service those hunters. I don't understand what is the thought process to bring that kind of legislation and to approve it.
They don't care. Ken, you and I both know that. They don't care about that. They're on some agenda that, oh my God, the polar bears are going extinct because they saw it on some sort of television program, and what are we going to do? Well, we got to stop these hateful Americans that kill these animals from doing it, and just to hang them on their walls. And that emotion is hard to beat in terms of getting that thinking in there, and they throw out, back to your original comments, they throw the science out. They don't care about the economies and what it does. I mean, we're battling now with in Congress and in a number of state legislatures that are trying to ban the importation of Big Five trophies from Africa. And
Yes.
Again, it's the same thing. Nobody thinks about what are those local economies that are over there that have to live next to those dangerous animals. If those animals don't have an economic value to the people that live right next to them and in amongst them, there's no incentive for them to protect them and keep that conservation efforts alive. So everything they're doing, as you and I both know, is actually is counterintuitive to in some regards, but actually makes sense. And if we don't allow sport hunting of those things, there's no incentive to keep them alive. Poachers are just going to go in there and kill them. And then what happens? There's no economic benefit to the community. There's no conservation of the species. And all these animal extremists are doing is ensuring the rapid extinction, and that's a strong word, but the decline in these numbers by their do-good feelings about, well, we don't want Americans to go over there and have the ability to go hunt. I mean, it's just crazy, and yet that thought process is prolific, and that's again why we at CSF are here to try to provide that information. We try to bring in ministers and ambassadors from these affected countries to come and do briefings and talk about it and hear from people that are actually from these countries and directly about what it means to their economy and how important hunting is as a conservation tool, which again is something that all of us know, and one thing that I know collectively as our community we got to continue to work on is getting that message out that hunting is conservation.
It's look, I've had this conversation with multiple people, and I think that we have some challenges. I think the challenge, one of the things that I really personally, I'm a meat hunter. I hunt for meat. If I happen to get a beautiful animal that's got a great rack or something spectacular about it, then that's fine. I'll take it to the taxidermist. But that's not what I go for hunting, or that's not why I go to hunt. But I think as an industry, we've put this tagline, trophy hunting, out, and the non-hunters believe that all hunters do, trophy hunters do, is shoot something, cut its head off, and they're done for the day. They have no idea that there's not one spare piece of meat that left over after you're finished. In Africa, as an example, I've been there a number of times, and if people could ever see what happens with, first of all, if they could ever see what happens when a herd of elephants goes through a village,
right?
They absolutely destroy everything, and it could be that entire year's food supply is gone in one evening. But if you are elephant hunting and you take an elephant into that village, there's nothing but a grease spot on the ground left an hour later. That's all that remains.
Right. Exactly.
But
100%.
So I think somehow we have to change this trophy hunting thing, and I think that's the industry. But the other thing is talk about the science. I was in Botswana in 2012. It was 2012. And I was in Namibia hunting, and then I went to Botswana just to a couple of safari camps, which was kind of interesting all by itself because these really high-end safari camps, in general, the people really don't like hunters. However, the local people love hunters because they recognize the economy. But in any event, Botswana banned elephant hunting shortly thereafter. I think it was 2012, maybe early 2013. And here we are, not 10 years later, but I think it happened earlier, that they found the elephant population in Botswana was declining so drastically. They lifted the ban, and the elephant population is growing again.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people have such a hard time understanding that.
No.
The thing is like the local people, and I don't care what it is, it's like the war on drugs, the same thing. People that live in these communities, little farms, small acreages, they have got to do something to make a living. And they're going to do the thing that is legal first, that can make a living. But if that's taken away from them, they're going to do freaking anything they can to make a living, as I would, as you would, as most other people would.
100%.
So if that's helping poachers because they can't make any money doing something legally, then they're going to do that. If that's growing marijuana because they can't grow wheat, they're going to do that. I mean, it just what's the saying? I think it's logical thinking is very illogical.
Yeah. But I mean, it's back to the same thing. They're gonna protect their family against dangerous, a herd of elephants going through a village is, just living next to elephants is a dangerous proposition, and especially if you're living in a fairly rudimentary kind of housing structure, and you don't have guns and stuff like that. So again, to those people that are living next door to these things, if that animal doesn't have some sort of, and to your point, some sort of economic value to me, I've got zero incentive. In fact, I've got an incentive to get rid of that animal because I don't want it there. It might be nice for tourists to go and see the beautiful elephants. For me, that's nothing but something that might step on me or kill my kids or at a minimum destroy all my crops and therefore, undermine my ability to survive. So, I mean, these are complex socio components to this thing that never seem to make any of these documentaries that you see on TV, that never seem to get into the discussions. And again, this is why, along with some of our other partner groups here, we try to bring in folks from these rural communities. And I know there have been films made here on our side trying to demonstrate how hunting does help the communities and helps wildlife, and it just gets lost in the emotional stuff. Elephants are going extinct around the world. No, that's not true. Yes, compared to their historic range, yes. But there are still places, as you know and I know, in Africa where there are too many elephants the habitat cannot support them, and they're actually culling elephants in Africa, and nobody wants to talk about that. The fact that there are too many elephants in Zimbabwe and some places in northern Botswana, in the Chobe and stuff, and yet nobody wants to talk about that. So, and again, bringing this back around to our conversation, the more we can arm the people in the United States that are making decisions that affect primarily stuff within our own borders, but when it comes to importations and stuff, that becomes the role that we play here, working with our legislators. And I'll give you a real recent example, and you're no doubt familiar with this. At the beginning of the waterfowl season, ostensibly in some sort of concern about avian influenza, the United States government was going to ban the importation of any kind of waterfowl that anybody harvested across the line in Canada. So the Americans that were typically go in the early part of the fall to take advantage of the wonderful waterfowl hunting in Manitoba and Saskatchewan and whatnot weren't going to be able to bring their birds back. And I mean, at face value, it was laughable because these are migratory birds. They're going to end up in the United States one way or the other. And my bringing a cooler full of dead birds home has got less impact than if these things hit the fields, in November somewhere. We were able to turn that around in 10 days and get that withdrawn. And that, again, was just being able to put the right level of pressure to make the right phone calls. And, the whole idea was laughable, but it was, it was concerning when they first dropped it because they didn't give anybody any notice, and people that were going to Canada that like to do that and bring home their duck and goose, meat. To your point, we like to use. We don't kill stuff just for the hell of it. We're bringing it back to eat it, and that was a really good example of being able to turn things around in Washington in pretty much rapid succession just because that was so laughable, And I talked to some friends of mine in the Department of Ag, where this was coming from. I was like, seriously? You're going to try to ban us from bringing waterfowl? They're all going to be here in another 6 weeks.
Well, look, Jeff, we can build a wall.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's just going to be a really freaking high wall.
Yeah, well.
Shit.
Oh, my Lord.
Makes no sense.
No, so.
Yeah, it's just crazy. We were talking a little bit about Africa, and I think what happens is a lot of the people, they look at these great places in Africa, and they totally forget about the places where the African people live. Look, for every beautiful camp in some place, or and I don't care whether it's Botswana or whether it's Namibia or Mozambique, wherever that might be, they just take up a small space in comparison with the hundreds of millions of acres that people don't travel to.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the places that are affected. I know that a friend of mine, Mark Haldane, I don't know if you've ever met Mark or
Yeah,
know him.
yeah, I know Mark. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So when he first got his concession, there was under 1,000 Cape buffalo there.
Yep.
Today he's got 25,000, in excess of 25,000. And he's maybe bordering having too many now, but
Yeah.
I mean and his is a hunting concession. So
Sure.
so it's interesting, but and you're right. Some of the decisions just make no sense. Those guys coming back from Saskatchewan after waterfowl hunting there, they might be bringing their cooler back. I don't even know what the limit is, but if it's like pheasant in South Dakota, it's 3 a day. So they're there for 4 days. They've got 12 ducks that they're bringing back, and yet in that 30 seconds, there's been 20,000 of them fly into the
Sure.
United States.
Yeah. No, just it was insane, So, but picking up on your point about the hunting contributing to the conservation, and we know this, and again, we try to do as good a job as we can to educate the legislators, but as a community to educate the public. I mean, we're just now celebrating the 85th anniversary of the passage of the Pittman-Robertson Act, and it's $15 billion worth of support for state-based wildlife management through those excise taxes on guns and ammo, and white-tailed deer, wild turkey, the bison, the elk, the populations of all of those animals have increased in those 85 years. And the simple answer as to why, because hunters have stepped up, shooters have stepped up. We've agreed that we're gonna allow that tax to be in turn passed down through the chain, and we as the end purchaser are ultimately paying part of that or all of that tax, and that system of a user pay, uniquely American system of user, even the Canadians don't have it, but that user pay public benefits system of conservation over 85 years has proven to be the greatest system that the world has ever known, and it is a partnership that is unique to the United States, but it is just the dividends. I mean, white-tailed deer are just you see them everywhere now, and so it's just what it shows you what you can do when you put your mind to it, and collectively we work together on stuff, and that's again part of what we try to do here all the time at the foundation, is look at opportunities. What can we do next? What farm bill programs? The federal farm bill is going to come up for reauthorization in the next Congress, and we're already working with the committees and within our partners in the community to say, what can we do to make the conservation titles stronger? Tweak programs to make them more advantageous for private landowners to sign up acreage, so that we set aside habitat that is really going to benefit wildlife. And so it's super exciting because these kind of things are clearly working, and kind of is what gets me up going. Yeah, we have to play defense. We're always going to play defense from the animal right extremists, from the antis, and just from, unfortunately, that uninformed middle of the American population. You're going to have to play defense, but there is still so much that we can do in terms of better conservation, of uniting things and working together to create, another, sorry if I'm rambling here, but another big effort that we've been heavily involved in are big game migration corridors in the West. And that's a combination of working with the federal government, because they own so much of the land, the state wildlife agencies that manage it, and then the private landowners that are integral to how can we provide better migration corridors to allow these historical migration patterns for elk and mule deer and pronghorn and things to be better managed in a cohesive manner to try to increase these populations. And it's a slow process, but boy, again, it's starting to yield yield some real results, and very happy to be a part of that. And these are the kinds of forward-thinking things that the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation is working on. So. Sorry for rambling.
This is good, very good conversation. I was talking yesterday to Sean Gray of Texas Parks and Wildlife, and he is kind of the program manager of pronghorn and mule deer. And our conversation was not dissimilar to this in some ways, but he basically said without the Pittman-Robertson Act, they wouldn't be able to do anything right now. So the reality is the money that they're getting allows them to have seen a fairly, except for this year was a terrible year in Texas. There was such a drought.
Yeah.
But prior to this, they'd seen some nice growth in herd size. And then of course we talk about white-tailed deer. They've got 6 million of them, but he thinks it's actually much greater than that.
Yeah.
So things like that are just really, really important. But one of the things that I have maybe I'm a little challenged with. So there's that big middle section of people that we all have to work with. We all need to figure out how to shift them towards, not towards our way of thinking, but more towards where, okay, I get it. I understand that. That's really quite important. I may never be a hunter. I may never eat game meat, but I understand what this is all about. One of the things that I think is a challenge is you and I know about conservation. We when we talk about it, if somebody says conservation, hunters are very, they're conservationists. I would suggest that middle group of people that are not hunters, when you talk about conservation, they don't get it. They don't know. They don't automatically know what that means. It's like trophy hunters. What is conservation? Now, as I said, you and I know it. How do we get those people in the middle to understand what that means? Because I think what they think is they go into a national park and they don't chop trees down. That's conservation. Okay, sure, that's conservation, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, sure. And I think, two things have happened. One is somewhere along the way, because conservation, I always like to go back to Gifford Pinchot, who was Teddy Roosevelt's first chief of what became the U.S. Forest Service, and loosely paraphrasing his definition he stated that conservation is the wise and sustainable use of the earth and its resources for the benefit of man. And I don't think there's a better definition to this day in terms of that. And yet somehow the environmental movement of the 70s has co-opted our word. And now, we've been relegated to the hook and bullet community, which sounds cool, but it's a huge disservice to all of us. And conservation is the environmental movement, because they knew that environmental movement was being, attached to the Greens, to sort of the radical left, if you will, and so I 100%, one we're trying to get the word back, and one of the ways, interestingly, you may have heard, Ken, of the Biden administration's 30 by 30 initiative, which is ostensibly a part of a global effort to preserve 30% of the Earth's surface and water and lands by the year 2030. And certainly at face value, that is extremely environmental driven. The Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, and with a lot of our partners now getting behind it, created something called Hunt Fish 3030. And you can Google that. Your listeners can Google that and see it. And what we've done is taken this opportunity and said, okay, you want to talk about conservation, we're going to spin this right back around and tell you what Pittman-Robertson, what Dingell-Johnson, what state wildlife licenses, fees, and things that we as hunters and anglers have done for conservation. And if you're going to start talking about 30 by 30, you better start talking about private lands and all the great work that people have done, the conservation reserve programs and the wetlands reserve programs and all these voluntary things that private landowners have done to to enhance the habitat on their lands, and we have really changed the whole dialogue, surprisingly, even more so than I expected when the initial report after they announced this came out from the Biden administration. They literally changed the word from preserve to conserve, and they used some of the very tenets of the things that we have always talked about as sportsmen and women, in the fact that conservation means wise and sustainable use of nature, and that was embedded into the top line of their report. And like I said, I was a little bit surprised at how much they embraced it, but it gave us a platform that we're continuing to drive to say that, you know, conservation is really the goal. Preservation is really, it's a tool in the toolbox with very limited applications, and it just doesn't apply because man is part of the landscape. We have impacted the landscape from the North Pole to the South Pole and all the way around the equator. We're here, and so we got to talk about conservation. And so it's been kind of fun, you know, to turn this thing around. And again, you know, we're trying to use that initiative that was really inspired by the environmentalists and turn that around and say, here's where you're so wrong about this thing, and here's what's so right. And by the way, hunters and anglers are the conservationists in the United States.
Well, it's interesting. They want to conserve that on one hand, but they want to take guns away from everybody on the other hand.
Exactly.
So, those two things don't really go hand in hand.
No, they do not. They do not. The gun owners and the shooters and the hunters are paying for conservation. Your friend that you talked about in Texas, that Pittman Robertson made that pronghorn, all those pronghorn work possible. Well, on average, 60% or greater of the state wildlife agency's funding comes from Pittman Robertson and the counterpart, the Dingell Johnson Act in fishing tackle on the fishery side of things, which are all a user pay and then the public benefits model coming off of sportsmen and women, and that model is unique to the United States and enormously successful. Again, using that Hunt Fish 30-30 to just really underscore how important hunters and anglers are to conservation, and yeah, we're going to keep hammering that point, I promise you.
Well, I've got to do my little research on Hunt Fish 30-30 myself. Thank goodness for Teddy Roosevelt, though. You mentioned his name.
Absolutely.
I mean, the shit that he did was unbelievable for hunting and fishing conservation. It's just phenomenal what that single man did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are opportunities for the 21st century. We're trying to seize on those, and you know, we're going to keep pushing and building on stuff that's there. But you know, there are new opportunities. That obviously the world has changed a heck of a lot from Theodore Roosevelt's day, and how we manage everything has to be adaptive too. And the same thing happens with political advocacy. You've got to be adaptive and looking at it, but having that infrastructure of these bipartisan caucuses so that you have direct reach into the decision makers, that's what puts CSF uniquely positioned and to be, you know, the leading advocate for hunting and fishing both at the federal and state level. And it's a role that we take seriously and are constantly working to figure out how we can be better at it.
So when we started the conversation, I mentioned that I joined the Congressional Sportsmen Foundation as the company in early 2000s. I think there's been a big change, though. I'm not talking about the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, but really I'm talking about the bipartisan group of people, because I think that just from kind of an outsider, that true bipartisan people are very difficult to find. People seem to be left, right, and boy, it's tough to get them to cross that line. Do you find the same? Tell me about it. Is it challenging to get true bipartisanism, or is not so much?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, I think, you know, it's especially in the last 20 plus years or so, when with this explosion of stuff on the World Wide Web and these information, the amount of information everybody can get right at their hand, has really polarized things, to your point, to the left and to the right, and that middle ground, that area, the fertile ground to make things happen is just, most of that has evaporated because your parties have gone hard right, hard left, and the old blue dog Democrats and those kind of more liberal Republicans that were in there that oftentimes were the deal makers really aren't there anymore. So it is definitely more challenging. The good thing is that when you talk about conservation, when you talk about the earth, when you talk about the benefits of nature, you can kind of dissolve some of that partisanship. You're never going to get the crazies on either end of the spectrum to totally buy into it. But if we start with that premise and then build in the fact that, well, hunting and fishing is all part of the conservation, both economically, socially, traditionally, and we tie that all together, that's where we find the opportunities to make things happen. And we had $40 billion worth of conservation funding in the last highway infrastructure bill. And you can argue, well, it was too much spending, it wasn't enough spending, blah, blah, blah. But $40 billion we lobbied for and got into the last highway bill for things like wildlife crossings and boat ramps and forest roads and things like that. And so you got to look at your opportunities, you got to be creative, and you got to be at the table as a known entity that is going to work with these elected officials, and that's what CSF has been doing for 30 plus years. So, but yeah, the environment is definitely more challenging because of the polarized nature of everything, and it's it's kind of gotten to be really nasty, and and that just doesn't help. And so we try to do things. You mentioned the Congressional shoot, our Congressional banquet. We try to bring Democrats and Republicans together just to realize that we can all love to go outside. We can all love the beauty of nature. We can love to wet a line or sit in a duck blind or sit in a deer camp. Those are common things that are not defined by a partisan label, and that's where we try to break that down and find unity in the message of conservation and as defined by Gifford Pinchot. So
I find it kind of interesting because I think the vast majority of people, at least the people that I know, are really kind of centrist. They may lean a little right, they may lean a little bit left, but the reality is they just want a decent life, and they want to go about their business, and they want to be, and they're very central. And and I guess I would say I think our politicians are not listening to the people that actually elect them.
Well, I think that's been an age-old strife. So
maybe it is. Maybe so. But I think it's become a little bit worse in the last.
It's 100%. And again, I'm not trying to lay it all at the feet of this giant explosion in all the social media and ability to do stuff, but those echo chambers to the left and the right just feed that whole storyline, feed that whole thinking that the enemy is the other political party and that the country's going to go down in flames, and it's just I personally am not a believer in that. So.
No. But I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. Social media has not done the world any favors. No. I get something on a regular basis, but I see things often from people that are really intelligent people. A friend of mine sent me something the other day. My daughter was a competitive figure skater a number of years ago, and he knows that. So he sent me this thing talking about a blind ice dancer and what a show they put on, and thousands of people were in tears. And this is a smart guy, and I sent it back to him. I said, Dick, this is bullshit. That didn't really happen. I said,
Yeah.
check things out. And so I think what's happened with social media is people actually believe something that they read on social media or something they read in Google or wherever
Right.
it is fact.
Yeah.
They don't do any research themselves.
It's a fantastic tool. I mean, we all, none of us can be far from our phones because we can communicate all the time around the world. It's your camera. It's your GPS system. I mean, it's got amazingly, but it's changed the world, and not all of it for the good. And so,
Right.
once again, I try to use that as a message with my own family and with friends is, put the phone down, go outside, sit in a deer stand in one afternoon and don't pull that phone out all the time and just watch the world go by and watch what happens, and your heart rate will go down, your senses will perk up, and just your entire demeanor will change, and we're getting away from that, and that is a much bigger problem than what we deal with at CSF, is how to reconnect people back to nature and the great outdoors. But certainly hunters and anglers are amongst the very best advocates for that, and very privileged to sit here and work on behalf of all of our community of hunters and anglers who are the original conservationists and still the driving force for conservation. So,
Look, I'm going to give a bit of a plug to publication because I'm going to read something. It is, just bear with me for a second, so I don't want to be wrong with this. Sporting Classics 2022 November-December issue. So we were at Remington. We were introducing a new gun, and we invited a bunch of writers. And there was Swarovski was involved with us. Hornady Ammunition was, and Cryptic Camo was. So one of the writers, this just came out, and he said something really, really interesting. He said. Excuse me for quoting this, but it says, "What never ceases to amaze, what is endlessly touching about this industry of hunters and fishers, wildlife conservationists, is the uninhibited and ever-stretching generosity. There is an innate hospitality in this community that I have never encountered before, a brotherhood of brilliance, talent, and charitability, clothed in khaki and camo. As a man of letters, I am left without words to convey what it means to be part of it." I thought that was pretty cool because I think that, and we've all been on bad hunts where we came home empty-handed. We've been on poor fishing trips where we came home empty-handed, and every single time, it's the quality of it is dependent on the group of people you were with.
Yep. Well, that was brilliant. First of all, that was really beautifully stated, and couldn't agree with him more. So, 100%. It's just the finest people I know are people that hunt and fish, and like I say, for me to have the opportunity to work in this environment on behalf of all those people is certainly a privilege, and I share that sentiment 100%.
Well, and look, and you get some of these people. I had the pleasure of quail hunting with Brian Kemp last quail season in Georgia, and you get somebody like Brian. I think is a great guy. I think he's done a really good job as a governor. Blah blah blah. But you get them out in the field with a gun, and they're just one of the guys, same as all of us are, and really good guys to be around. So I think what happens is it covers, you can be out in the field with a congressman and a plumber, and they both have something in common, and they'll get along fine. So
exactly.
I think we've got a lot in common with each other when we're out in the field. Where are you going in the future? What do you see? Just keep plugging away. Is there any big things? You've talked about the Hunt Fish 3030. Anything else kind of on the horizon?
Yeah, some of our big play stuff federally. There's a bill called Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. And the sand is running out of the hourglass for this Congress, but I think it's an important effort to try to bridge that gap. So much of the funding for state wildlife agencies comes off of the back of the Pittman Robertson and Dingell Johnson money, but the responsibilities for the state agencies have grown dramatically, and in particular, there's about 12,000 candidate species of plants and animals that could be listed under the Endangered Species Act, and nobody wants stuff to go onto the Endangered Species Act. And so the state agencies are challenged now with doing their traditional roles, and yet they've got all these potential species, and there just isn't the funding there. So Recovering America's Wildlife Act is a big push to try to plus up that funding and really complement the funding that we as the sportsmen's community are providing the state agencies. So that's a big push. I mentioned the Farm Bill will come up in 2023, and there's the largest private land conservation efforts come out of the Farm Bill on a federal basis. We're really looking at how we can improve the deliverables on those programs. Constantly there are fisheries issues that probably we don't have enough time to go through that my team is working on, whether it's marine fisheries or some of the freshwater fisheries, and so there's there's always opportunities out there. We're always looking for those opportunities, and then internally we are just trying to make sure that we have the right people in the right places with the right expertise to constantly be that trusted source to those elected officials that ultimately make the decisions, so that we are providing them accurate, really concise, timely information, and they know they can trust us because we're not playing political games with it. We are trying to do the right thing for conservation and the future of hunting and fishing. So we could spend another hour and a half talking about individual programs, or a whole day, because I've got so many things going on. We track when the states are in session. On average, we're tracking 10,000 bills in a week, and so it's a lot to stay on top of. We've got over 100. What we call issue briefs with ideas for legislators, again, primarily at the state level, on things that they could be doing. The apprentice hunting license is a really great, successful thing that we've been spearheading along with other. I don't mean to take all the credit, but we've been spearheading that through these state caucuses, and over 2.5 million apprentice hunters have taken advantage of apprentice hunting licenses. And so there's just lots and lots of stuff going on. And if your listeners and your readers are interested, our website is www.congressionalsportsman.org, and there's all kinds of information how you can get involved and everything on the website. So.
Oh, well, you just answered my next question. I was going to ask how individuals can get involved, so now we know.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of information there. You can click on your own state and find out what's going on at your state. You can see what's going on federally, and keep up on knowledgeable about what's going on. We put out. You can sign up and subscribe to our e-newsletters to hear what is happening out there, and so encourage people to stay involved. We need people that stay involved, because at the end of the day, politics is local. Your politician gets elected by you, and whether it's your county, your state, your federal elected officials, and if you know what's going on and can remind them that you're a hunter, you're an angler, you care about conservation, it means a lot. Helps me do my job and my team do our jobs. When we have people that come up here and hear from their constituents. So, but yeah, we've got. I'm very optimistic about what the opportunities that are in front of us, and we're going to keep hammering back the anti stuff, whether it's with our partners on anti-Second Amendment, anti-gun stuff, or anti-hunting, but I really like to play offense, and the opportunities and success that we're having on and moving things forward is I think we're moving the needle. So
I think you are too. Jeff, this has been very, very enlightening to me, and I'm sure to anybody that listens. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time. I think it was fantastic. I look forward to seeing you in person in the not too distant future, and we can spend more time chatting.
Sounds great. Thank you, Ken, for inviting me to join you, and look forward to seeing you down the road.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate your time.
Okay. Take care.